Hi everybody, I'm Greg Fishel. Welcome to bonus weather video number 1 for this week, and I've entitled this one, How the Atmosphere Warms. Now I know that we probably by default think about the sun as being the source of our warmth, and ultimately it is, but it isn't direct, okay? It isn't like the sun is heating up the atmosphere from the top down. It actually occurs from the bottom up. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And there are actually several mechanisms that go into all of this. So let me go ahead and put myself down here in the corner. And first we have to start off, of course, with some definitions. So radiation is defined as the transfer of energy through electromagnetic waves. Now, in a previous bonus weather video, we talked about the electromagnetic spectrum, which goes all the way from really, really long wavelengths like radio waves to very, very short wavelengths like gamma rays, okay? And then the visible part of that spectrum is about 0.4 to 0.7 microns, microns being 10 to the minus 6 meters, okay? So the sun is sending out waves of radiation at all of these different wavelengths, but most of them are in the visible range where we can actually see it, and then that radiation then penetrates the Earth's atmosphere. Some of it is reflected, a little bit of it is absorbed by the atmosphere, but more than anything, it's absorbed by the ground, okay? More on that in a second. Now, conduction is the transfer of energy by direct contact, okay? So like if you were to touch a hot stove, which I would not recommend doing, but if you did, then the transfer of heat would be from that hot stove to your finger or hand. It always goes from hot to cold. And so by you making direct contact with that hot stove, then your finger then begins to feel that heat. And then finally, convection is the transfer of energy by differences in density, okay? So let's say that an air parcel is heated so that it is now warmer than its environment and less dense than its environment, then it is going to start to move by virtue of the fact that it is less dense than the environment that it's in, okay? So those are the three mechanisms we'll talk about right now. So, radiation, we've got our sun up there and it's sending off these electromagnetic waves at various different wavelengths, but those waves then travel toward the ground. Now again, part of it is reflected back to space, part of it is absorbed by the atmosphere, but more than anything else, it is absorbed by the ground, okay? So the ground absorbs the solar radiation. Then, through the process of conduction, the ground heats the air immediately above it by direct contact. Now we're just talking about like the lowest few centimeters of the atmosphere, okay? Right above the ground, that warming ground is heating the air above it by virtue of direct contact, okay? And then the process of convection, that heated air becomes buoyant or less dense than its environment, and it begins to rise. And this then begins the process of transferring that heat, which got started by the process of conduction, carrying that heat higher and higher up into the atmosphere. And then the colder air aloft, which is negatively buoyant, if you will, begins to sink, okay? And it sets up this circulation, is what meteorologists call vertical mixing, okay? So this is what that ends up looking like, where the warm air rises, the cold air sinks, and so it's almost like a big spoon, okay, that's stirring up the atmosphere and keeping it well mixed and preventing the warm areas from getting too warm and the cold areas from getting too cold. Now, in the wintertime, because the sun is weaker and it doesn't heat up the ground as much, the mixing depth of the atmosphere may only be 2,000 to 3,000 feet. Whereas in the summertime, when the sun's rays are much more direct, you can actually get mixing all the way up to 6, 7, in some extreme cases, maybe even 8,000 feet, okay? And this is how meteorologists sometimes predict high temperatures, because if you have some idea as to how deep the mixing layer is going to be and what the temperature is going to be at the top of that mixing layer, you can then use the dry adiabatic lapse rate, take it down from that level all the way to the surface and say, okay, if we're mixed to that level and I know what it is at the top, I can predict what it's going to be at the bottom. So that is a technique that is often used on sunny days. It doesn't work on cloudy days or rainy days, but on sunny days it tends to be at least a good first guess to get you in the ballpark of what the high is likely to be for that day. So again, The sun provides the electromagnetic radiation. A lot happens to that as it enters the Earth's atmosphere, but a good portion of it is absorbed by the ground. The ground then heats the air immediately above it by direct contact. That's conduction. And then convection is a mixing process which then transports that heat higher and higher into the atmosphere. And depending on the time of year, that mixing depth will vary. Okay, I hope that makes sense. That is bonus weather video number 1 for this week. Number 2 will be coming up Wednesday. And of course, the short version of the daily update is already out. The extended version will be out fairly shortly. And that's about it for now. So you all have a good one, and we'll talk to you soon. See you later, everybody. Bye-bye.